Welcome. Ken Woods here from the English Symphony Orchestra, and I'm so pleased to be speaking to my dear friend, the great composer David Matthews, longtime friend of the ESO, our composer-in-association in 2017 and 18, and composer of one of the most wonderful works in our 21st Century Symphony project, his Ninth Symphony, which we premiered in 2018. One of the highlights of my musical life that always puts a smile on my face whenever I think about it. And we're here today to talk to David about his arrangement of the Elgar String Quartet, which will be coming up on ESO Digital very, very soon. So David, welcome. It's great to see you.
Very good to see you too, Ken.
So arranging, it's always a somewhat controversial topic with non-musicians. I don't know any musicians who are actually bothered by the idea of one person arranging the work of another person. But you get into the world of critics and commentators, and they always sort of look kind of worriedly and disapprovingly at the idea of this going on. Tell me how you got interested in working with the music of other composers in addition to doing your own works.
Well, I can't remember where it started now. I've been doing it for ages. And I did count the number of arrangements I've done over the years, and it comes to about 80, which is extraordinary. And there are two categories. One, you orchestrate something from a piano piece. The other, you have an orchestral piece and you reduce it. I mean, when I say a piano piece, I mean, that's what it usually is. In this case, of course, it was a string quartet. I mean, this is one of the more straightforward sorts of arrangement because you've got the string quartet and you don't really have to do all that much to it except add a bass part. I mean, I did thicken out the textures in places, and I also made some decisions about leaving just a few solos in, like at the end of the intermezzo. I just preserved the original solos because that seemed right.
Absolutely, and it works beautifully in the context, I think.
But it's been an important part of my life, as I said, and I've really enjoyed doing arrangements, and they're very useful. I mean, for example, I've done an arrangement of Peter and the Wolf, which has been played all over the place, just with single strings and no heavy brass. And a piano to fill in the gaps. That's been very, very, very much, a very useful piece. And I think that in other works as well, it gives the opportunity to perform because you know this yourself, because you've done to perform, great orchestral works with smaller forces, and it's perfectly possible to do that, as you know.
I gather you've just done some new arrangements during lockdown of Mahler's songs for the BBC Philharmonic.
Yes, Kindertotenlieder. It wasn't terribly difficult because they did have quite a large number of instruments. I mean, they had most of the woodwind and two horns except four. But I mean, Mahler only uses four horns in the last song. The last song was the only problematic one, and I had to do without, for example, the Celesta at the end. I used harp harmonics instead, and also the glockenspiel in the first movement. I again used harp harmonics for that. But apart from that, it was just a bit of a rush job, so it took some time to do, but it wasn't that difficult technically.
Well, and of course, it's not far from Mahler's original ethos for the piece anyway. He described the Rückertlieder and Kindertotenlieder as his mature chamber music, didn't he?
Yes, and I believe when he conducted it, certainly at the first performance, I think he didn't use many strings, which is probably quite a good idea. Sarah Connolly, who was singing, said she was so happy with the balance, which she finds occasionally quite difficult, I think, particularly in the finale, if there are lots of strings.
Yeah, I think that's true of a lot of vocal music of that era, that in the reductions, actually, it can free up the singer to sing more expressively because they don't have a sort of threshold below which they can't sing without getting covered by the orchestra.
Yeah, that's right, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the orchestration of string quartets is actually a pretty big topic, and one might start with Mahler, who orchestrated both the Schubert Death and the Maiden and the Beethoven Serioso Quartet for string orchestra. And those are actually arrangements that you had a hand in bringing to light.
Yes, indeed. Yes. I mean, the Mahler never finished the Death and the Maiden quartet. Only the slow movement was, and then that's the only one. That's the only movement that was performed actually in his lifetime. Um, he made some. He put in some suggestions for the other movements, but I had to do the rest really. Um, and with the Beethoven Quartet, I actually rediscovered it. It was thought to be lost, and I thought, well, it's probably in the Vienna Philharmonic Library, and I went to the Vienna Philharmonic Library, and there it was. I mean, they hadn't looked for it properly. There it was, the
Absolutely
marked up
amazing.
score and the parts, all in Mahler's handwriting. So
How wonderful. I remember the first time I did the Death and the Maiden transcription and being so impressed at Mahler's sophisticated use of divisi to make the first violin part more uh, idiomatic and
yes,
ergonomically playable, because Schubert writes all these crazy leaps. But I believe that's actually your intervention, not Mahler, if it's in the first movement in particular.
yes.
Yeah. And around that time also you had Schoenberg arranging his own second quartet for string orchestra as well as Verklärte Nacht. And the Elgar String Quartet is from only a few years after Mahler's death, isn't it? And it was a period when Elgar himself wasn't writing any orchestral music.
No, no, he was living in Prinkwells and the cottage in Sussex where he retired during the war, and he wrote three chamber pieces which he hadn't done before. I mean, three major chamber pieces, didn't he? The string quartet and the piano quintet and the violin sonata.
It's interesting that he waited till sort of the end of his creative life to do that. I mean, he lived many years afterwards, but he'd written most of his major works by the time he turned to chamber music. And one wonders if Mahler would have gotten there too, had he had a little bit more time. You know, if he'd been around during the war years when orchestras weren't playing, would he have given us a mature string quartet or two? Wouldn't that have been a concept?
It would be wonderful, yes.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how this arrangement of the Elgar Quartet came to pass. Was it for a specific occasion that you did it?
Yes, well, it was 2002. George Vass asked me to arrange the slow movement. Well, it's not really a slow movement. It's an intermezzo, isn't it? It's andante, but not particularly slow.
No.
And then that was in 2002, and then some years later he thought he could do the whole piece if I arranged the rest at the Prestine Festival, and I did that in 2010, and he performed it there. So that's how it came about. But interestingly, I had actually always thought that it could work for strings, because sometimes I think it's sort of almost it's bursting at its seams. You know, it sounds a lot like, say, the introduction of Allegro at times, I think, and it's almost in some cases just too big a piece for a string quartet.
It's interesting that you say that, because our mutual friend Donald Fraser, who's done an arrangement of the piano quintet, which is from the same period in his life, said almost the exact same thing about that work too, which is that, you know, it's so richly scored for piano and strings that the string players have to really play enormously big the whole time to keep up.
And I think the addition of a bass part really does help. And it gives it a sort of grandeur, which it's there in the music, but you can't quite get it from the string quartet.
Well, absolutely. And
no, I don't want to say that the string quartet doesn't work as a string quartet. It does, but it's just that it's very possible to turn into a string orchestral piece.
And of course, the string quartet version is a masterpiece. I think we both agree on that. But for instance, in terms of adding the bass, it's a very, very high and acrobatic first violin part. So having something an extra octave down, I think, does help balance that out and give more of a foundation for these vertiginous first violin
Yes.
Excursions up to the end of the fingerboard, which of course in an orchestral setting, when you've got to get 8 or 12 players to hit the same note at the same time, is an even greater challenge. And of course, one of the reasons that we're all drawn to this process of arranging is the need to keep the repertoire fresh, isn't it? I mean, for an orchestra like ours, which has, half of our life is playing string orchestra music. I mean, how many times can you play the Elgar Serenade, beautiful as it is, without losing your mind, And so to have another major Elgar string piece to go with the introduction, Allegro, and the Serenade is a great blessing for us. We did it with you present at the 2018 Elgar Festival, which was very, very memorable and, sounded glorious in the acoustic of Worcester Cathedral. And I just thought it would be a wonderful thing to include in this this project of online concerts. It's a piece that's been on our wish list to record for a long time. And although it has been recorded, it hasn't been recorded in sort of modern instrument approach with full-throated vibrato and big sound.
No, it was a sort of authentic performance, as it were, but with not many strings either. You've got your strings. What was your strings?
We used 86442 in this recording, which I think suits it well. I mean, it's as with a lot of string quartets that one plays in larger groupings, like the two Shostakoviches, which exist as string orchestra pieces, the Ullmann that I've done, and Tchaikovsky Third Quartet, which I did. It's harder than most string orchestra music because, they've written it with the assumption that a great string quartet will rehearse it properly over some weeks, And so it's nice to have a slightly bigger body of strings so that everyone has the confidence of feeling part of something, that security that comes from playing with other people. And I have to say that of all the socially distanced things we've had to do this year, string orchestra repertoire is the most challenging. As soon as you add a trumpet or a timpanist, it gives people who are, sat a mile or two apart from each other in a great big reverberant space something to latch onto. But the nature of string orchestra, even under the best circumstances, is to swim a little bit. So it's been very challenging but exciting to do all these. And I'm sure when we get back to doing them, where we can actually share stands and sit a little closer to each other, it'll feel incredibly easy after all this time. Before we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about your music and what you've been composing over this last strange year. I gather you haven't been sat at home idle twiddling your thumbs. Tell us a little bit about what you've composed of late.
Well, I had, when it started, finished Act 1 of an opera, and so I carried on, and I've done Act 2 now, and so the whole thing's is complete. So when it will be done, I just don't know. And I've also written a 10th symphony, which I didn't intend to write, but I thought, well, what should I do next? I'll write a 10th symphony. I mean, I'm rather pleased I've done that now, because I've got over the problem of, not only when I wrote the 9th, I thought, well, I got over the 9th, but now I've got past that.
Yeah, you've escaped the curse of the 9th. We joked several years ago that, of course, you were known early in your life for having worked on the Derek Cook completion of Mahler's 10th Symphony. Yeah. And I remember someone asking you at Mahler Fest in 2017 when you came, what would your wishes be if you left an uncompleted 10th Symphony? And you said, well, I just hope a good composer would do it. But now that problem is solved. So.
Yes. I can now start sort of competing with Shostakovich. I think Haydn is a bit beyond me.
Well, you never know. I mean,
well, Brian, I know, wrote 20 symphonies in his 80s, but all the same, I think there's a bit too many, actually.
Yes. Quality over quantity is definitely the way to go. And Signum, I believe it is, has just released your 8th symphony on CD.
Yes, they have.
And that seems to be getting wonderful reviews. Tell us a little bit about that piece. Was it written for the Philharmonic?
Yes, it was. I mean, I've got a long association with the BBC Philharmonic going back since 1980s, and they played many of my pieces and commissioned. I can't remember now. It's certainly about 4, including 2 of my symphonies, the 7th and the 8th. And I'm just very fond of the orchestra, and they seem to like playing my music very much. And this whole CD has really wonderful playing on it. And I also admire Jack Van Steen, the conductor, who's done a lot of my music.
He's a fantastic musician and a really lovely guy, and
he is.
You're in great hands with him anytime he takes up your
Yes.
music. I think the last time I saw you in person, Jack was there too. It was when we did Le Lac at the Orchestra of the Swan, which was wonderful.
Yeah, he wants to do Le Lac, but he can't arrange it with a German orchestra, but he can't do it yet because he can't get the forces.
Well, hopefully soon. I know we're all just chomping at the bit to get back to planning concerts and programs. So having completed your 10th symphony, is there a next piece on the desk now? Are you going to celebrate for a few days?
Yes, I'm finishing an oboe sonata, which I started more than a year ago for Nick Daniel.
Wonderful.
He's actually performed two of the first 2 movements at the Leicester Online Festival, and I'm writing 5 movements. So I've written 2 more. In fact, I've just finished the 4th movement, which is a little tango. I'm rather fond of tangos.
You are, yes.
And he is too, because he did sort of suggest that I might write one. And so I've just got the finale to write now. It's going to be a big finale, but it's going to be quite a major piece. I mean, 25 to 30 minutes.
Wonderful. And that's an area of the repertoire that needs contributions, isn't it? The woodwind sonata repertoire, there's a few masterpieces, but lots of scope for new work, I think.
Yes, well, when he asked me to write it, he said, could you write a big sonata? Because there are very few of them. The only one, I think the only English one is Howells, isn't it? Yes.
Well, you can't ask for a better advocate for your music than Nick, too. I mean, he's such a wonderful player. Wonderful colleague.
I've got to finish that, but I'm not quite sure what I'm doing next.
Well, I think you're allowed a break after that.
I've got a lot of the opera to put onto a computer. I mean, I've got a pencil score, and it's about 450 pages. So, and I've only just started putting it on computer, so that's going to take probably most of the rest of the year.
You have my every sympathy there. Yes. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us, David. And hopefully next time we speak to you, it'll be about one of your pieces coming up in this series. We certainly hope so. And in the meantime, thanks a lot for being with us.
Well, thanks very much, Ken. And thanks for this superb performance that you've done.
Cheers.